Recording.
Already did. Webcasting has started. Right at 9:28. Anthony?
Yes.
Okay.
English recording started. Spanish recording started.
Sounds good.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to start with the opening remarks?
Sure, let's go ahead and do that.
Thank
you,
you.
Mayor.
Good morning. Thank you for participating in our remote meeting for the Stationary Source Committee meeting. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation. We ask that everyone be patient as we navigate this together. We have two formats to participate in the meeting: the Zoom web application and teleconference. Both formats, Zoom and teleconference, can be heard in English and Spanish. If you're calling into the meeting and wish to listen to the meeting in Spanish, please dial 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID number 977-5753-3374. Again, for the Spanish teleconference line, please dial 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID number 977-5753-3374. For those participating in the meeting via Zoom, it is critical for everyone to click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen that looks like a globe. Then select the language of your choice, either English or Spanish. Before we begin, I want to review some guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. These are very important, so I ask that you pay close attention. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell or desk phone. This will ensure that we're not hearing any feedback or causing interruption during the meeting. During the meeting, all participants on Zoom, except for board members and South Coast AQMD staff, will be placed on mute by the host. That means that you will not be able to mute or unmute your lines manually. After each agenda item, the chair will announce public comment. For those on Zoom, if you would like to make public comment on the Zoom screen, please click on the raise hand button. This will signal to the host that you would like to provide public comment and you will be added to the list. If you're using Zoom on your smartphone, please tap the raise hand button on the bottom of the screen. For those calling in using the phone line only, you can dial *9 on your keypad to signal that you would like to comment. Your name will be called when it's your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. For the matters of decorum, please adhere to speaker time limits. Please treat others with courtesy and civility, and respect the public meeting process. Rules prohibiting the use of signs or posters remain in effect for video participation. Profanity, discriminatory comments, or obscene gestures is prohibited. Disorderly, unruly, or aggressive behavior that infringes upon the rights of others or disrupts the good working order of the meeting is also prohibited. Any violations of the above rules can result in your mic being mute, your video feed shut off, or you being dropped off from the phone or the Zoom meeting lines. Mr. Chair, that concludes our opening remarks.
Very good, thank you. We'll go ahead and I'll call the November 20th Stationary Source Committee to order. And if we go do a roll call. Yes,
Mr. Chair, point of order. The
Supervisor?
information that he just read about how to listen to the meeting in Spanish was said in English. Could we perhaps say it in Spanish so people who need to understand it could?
I believe the interpreter does that automatically on the Zoom meeting, and if they've called in on the phone line. So maybe, Amir, if you could just maybe in Spanish, or someone could read in Spanish the portion that tells them how to call in on the Zoom line, or call in, and how to get into the Spanish language.
I'm going to ask our Spanish interpreter that's on the line if you can read that for us. Goodness. I'm not sure if our Spanish interpreter is actually coming online.
You know, if they're speaking it into the Spanish side, that's not going to help anyone that's stuck on the English side, not able to understand.
I completely understand, sir. Let me see if we can contact the Spanish interpreter.
All right, while they're working on that, Supervisor, okay if we go ahead and do a roll call?
Chair, if you make sure that at the bottom, you click on the globe and select English.
Yes.
Everyone needs to do that if they're listening in on English. And if listening in on Spanish, they'll click on Spanish. She did just mention everything onto that.
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good.
That's correct. I have pressed the English button under interpretation, and I heard her say it in Spanish.
I did as well. All right, go ahead and do a roll call now.
Senator Delgado. Board Member Krakoff.
Here.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Here.
Supervisor Rutherford.
Here.
Chair Benoit.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, seeing we do have a quorum, I'll go ahead and go to the first item number 1, the approve the financial incentive program to reduce emissions from hexavalent chromium plating facilities. Julian Wong, go right ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jillian Wong, Rules Manager, and I'm here today to provide you with information regarding the incentive funding program for hexavalent chromium emission reductions at Rule 1469 facilities. This is an action item for the committee. Next slide, please. So a year ago, staff presented updates to this committee regarding the implementation of Rule 1469. At that time, staff committed to seeking funding to provide incentives for the small chrome plating facilities to transition away from the use of chemical fume suppressants and instead to install air pollution controls. Staff is happy to report today that we have secured slightly over $5 million worth of funding within CARB's AB 617 Community Air Protection or CAP funds to allow the emission reductions of hex chrome. In addition to the switch out from the use of chemical fume suppressants, the conversion from hex chrome to a trivalent chromium process or other less toxic technologies will also be allowed in this program. Next slide, please. So Rule 1469 has emission limits for hex chrome for chrome plating, anodizing, and associated processes. We lump these all together typically as plating facilities. For the smaller facilities that have lower throughputs or usage, we do allow certified chemical fume suppressants to be used to meet emission limits instead of installing the more expensive air pollution controls. These smaller facilities are typically small businesses and they do conduct decorative plating. So plating for car parts, tools, household items like forks and spoons. Most of the certified chemical fume suppressants contain per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, also known as PFAS. These chemicals are persistent in the environment and recent health studies have shown that there are links to a variety of health issues, therefore the concern of its usage. Staff conducted source tests at tanks using PFAS, and what we found was that the air quality emissions are actually minimal. However, this continues to be a water quality concern, and we're aware of other environmental agencies looking into the possibility of banning the use of PFAS altogether. Next slide, please. Therefore, the incentive program that we are proposing for these chrome plating facilities is to provide them the funding to replace the use of chemical fume suppressants by installing the add-on air pollution control devices so that they can still meet the emission limits for hexchrome, or to give them the opportunity to move away from the use of hexchrome altogether and transition to either the trivalent chromium plating process or any other less toxic alternatives that might be available. In order to streamline our program implementation, we are proposing the issuance of 2 program opportunity notices, one for facilities and one for contractors. For the facilities, it's to alert them to the program, let them know of the criteria, and to elicit responses from them to participate. We understand that because these facilities tend to be small, they might not have the ability to find contractors to partner with them to implement these projects. Therefore, we're also proposing to issue a notice for contractors to screen out contractors who have experience in installing these pollution controls. And therefore, once we select a project at a facility, that facility has the option of selecting their own contractor or looking at this list of contractors that we have compiled to pick someone to partner with. This will really help streamline implementation and make the projects go faster. Next slide, please. So the overall approach that we're proposing is to prepare and submit a project plan to CARB. This project plan will follow CARB's 2019 CAP guidelines for hexavalent chromium plating facilities. The main and key difference in that is that we are proposing that for small businesses, instead of the 80 or 90% project funding amount, we would actually cover 100% of project costs. This will really help incentivize and spur these small businesses to take advantage of this program. We're going to issue the 2 program opportunity notices to both the facilities and contractors to elicit responses. And as part of our outreach, we're planning a community meeting within the 4-county region to get feedback from the community. We will also update the AB 617 East LA Boyle Heights West Commerce Community Steering Committee as the reduction of hexchrome emissions from these plating facilities was identified as an action item in their SERP. And finally, we plan on coordinating, and we have started coordination with the Metal Finishing Association of Southern California, as they can help us outreach to the facilities and try to get more interest and participation from those facilities. And finally, implementation of the program will include execution of contracts with the facilities and contractors. This funding, the projects have to be completed and the funding totally exhausted by June 30th, 2022. So it's very, very tight deadlines. Next slide, please. So staff had initially identified a list of facilities that would be candidates for this program. And we reached out to these facilities to find out and to gauge their interest in the program. What we found, as you can imagine, is that many businesses at this point, given the economic situation, the hardships that they are facing because of COVID, they are hesitant to commit right away to participation. We heard that most facilities have seen dramatic decreases in the demand for their products. Some facilities, depending on the cities they're located in, because they are considered non-essential services, had to shut for some period of time. And there were also many concerns that these add-on air pollution control devices have much higher operating costs than their current method, which is using these chemical fume suppressants. So therefore, staff is also recommending that if we do not obtain enough projects to use up all of the allocated funding, that unspent funds will be used for the backup list of mobile source projects that was submitted to CARB. Next slide, please. Therefore, at this time, staff is recommending that you approve establishment of the financial incentive program to reduce hexavalent chromium emissions at plating facilities, that you approve issuance of the 2 program opportunity notices to facilities and contractors to solicit responses, that you authorize the executive officer to execute contracts with these selected entities to implement the program, given the tight deadlines that we have to use up the funding, and that if there are any unallocated project funds, that they be released to be used by the backup list of mobile source projects. And finally, that the general fund be reimbursed for administrative costs of up to 6.25% of project costs. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Mayor Benoit.
My apologies, I was on mute. Councilmember Mitchell, I see you have your hand raised. I also have some public comments. Do you want to ask a question before public comment?
I do. I have a few questions.
Please.
I'm wondering what kinds of control devices would be used in lieu of PFAS? That's question 1. And question 2 that goes along with that is how realistic is it for these entities to use trivalent chromium?
So to answer your first question, the control device is a HEPA filter system, and that has been used for some of the other tanks, the tier 2, tier 3 tanks as a method of control. With regards to the switch to trivalent, at the time of rulemaking for 1469, we did broach that topic, and we heard from some facilities that there was concern that the trivalent chromium process would create a subpar product, if you will. That, you know, the shine and the color would not be the same as hexavalent, and because this is for decorative purposes, that their customers might not be accepting of that product.
On the HEPA filter, I'm not quite sure how that works. What I understood was they were using PFAS in some of these facilities where they had liquid pools, and PFAS was spread on top of it to prevent the emissions. But if you're using a HEPA filter, does it work with that kind of process, or is it something else?
It would work with that process. So the HEPA filter, it would be a whole system that would get installed on the tank, and it would ensure that all of the emissions from the tank are then captured by the system and routed through the HEPA filter.
Okay. All right. Okay. Next question was, I believe you said that for the small businesses, this funding could cover 100% of the cost. Did I hear you right?
Correct. That is what we are proposing. So
Okay.
in our project plan, we plan on asking for 100% of the project costs. We also plan on including costs for, so the project lifetime, or the period of the contract will be 3 years. We're also proposing to include HEPA filter replacements for that 3-year period.
Okay. I guess what my concern is that we think about the money being distributed fairly and equally across, the small business sector, so that we don't have one small business that the whole amount, because I don't know what these things are going to cost, but I do think it's something we ought to pay attention to. If you're going to cover 100% of the cost, do we have enough money to cover all applicants? I think that is one of the issues. Could you respond to that?
Sure,
I wanted
yes.
a point of clarification. Sorry for your previous question. In regards to the cost, although we're going to cover 100% of the capital costs and the first source test, there are ongoing, and then we can probably cover costs for filters for a short time period, but there's ongoing operating and maintenance costs associated with the HEPA filtration system and monitoring and source testing that's required under 1469. And so when we reached out to the facilities that potentially would be eligible, their concern was the ongoing operation and maintenance, recognizing even just the electricity to plug it in and to go would be difficult for them at this time.
Okay. Then I know that Southeast LA, the AB 617 community does have within their SERP to attack metal plating, metal coating facilities. Did I hear you say that Boyle Heights didn't have that in their SERP and they want to amend the SERP to include it?
No, they did. That was actually identified as an action item within that SERP. And so therefore we plan on going back to the CSC in that community to give them an update on the progress that we have made towards that action item.
I see. Okay. Then you also mentioned that if the money allocated for this was not fully subscribed, that then it would go into back into the pot to be used for, I believe you said mobile sources. Did I hear you correctly?
Correct.
And when we do that, then is it spread across all of the AB 617 communities in the South Coast, or how does that work?
I am not sure on that, on how it would get allocated once it goes back to the backup list of projects, but perhaps Dr. Fine or Dr. Ghosh might know, or Dr. Miyasato.
Yeah, hi, Board Member Mitchell. So we have a large backup list of mobile source projects that would comply with the AB 134, AB 16 funding requirements. And because we're oversubscribed in that list, if this money is unused, we would put it toward that.
Okay, so it could be used in other disadvantaged areas
That's
other
correct.
than these two that where the metal plating facilities are located. Okay, thank you. That covers all my questions.
Very good. Any other board member comments or questions before public comment? All right, now one more point of order, Judith, if you wouldn't mind backing me up as far as if I lose my connection. My internet connection has been a little unstable this morning. So if for some reason I'm no longer with you, if you want to take over the meeting and keep us moving.
I'll be happy to. Thank you.
All right, I'll go ahead and call on the public comment. I see one hand raised on the public comment side. Jerry Desmond?
Yes, hello, Chair, if you can hear me.
Yep, go right ahead.
Thank you. And Jerry Desmond, on behalf of the Metal Finishing Association of Southern California, you know, the referenced association that Ms. Wong and the staff are working with, calling in to express our support for this effort to provide an incentive program for these smaller facilities. I can confirm that we've been working together with, you know, the district in order to try to develop a way that this would work. And I would concur in the findings that Ms. Wong discussed on that slide in regards to the challenges to the smaller facilities, the economic turndown, the COVID impact on the workforce and the customers. And I would also concur with the challenges that we're experiencing still, as with 1469 near the final stages with trying to convert to trichrome. You know, the mil spec for hex chrome is still there. I know that the state board and folks on this committee are well aware of the Chrome ATCM at the CARB, and they're looking at that as well. And we'll engage, get the word out, try to make sure that there isn't just one or two facilities, that everybody has the opportunity. And so we would look forward, if the motion passes and the effort passes, to work with the district to try to see if this could actually get out in the field and we can get some participation. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Next speaker is James Seminelli. James?
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much to the committee and chair. My name is James Simonelli. I'm executive director of the California Metals Coalition. As you heard from Jerry Desmond, he represents the Metal Finishing Association. So our members do not include metal finishers, but our members use the metal finishers. The products that we make were often sent to that group. So we want to definitely support. We need them close to us. We don't want to send our products out of state or out of country to be plated. We want to keep it in California. So anything we can do to support them would be beneficial. I also want to put in one comment because we haven't, number 2 on your agenda is one of our items. If there is not sufficient response from this group, I would request that the backup list include other companies that are trying to reduce hexavalent chromium, metal companies, I should say. I don't want it to slow down the process for the metal finishers, but I think it should be considered that if the community is asking for the reductions and if the industry can do more, that it be considered that this pot of money stay within the group. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comments on this item? If you're on the phone, you need to hit *9. If you're on Zoom, you would hit the raise hand button at the bottom of the participants list or the bottom of your screen. And I'm not seeing any other public comment this time. I'll bring it back to the board. Any other board member comments, questions?
We don't need to move approval on this, do we?
We do have this actually is calling for an action item on this particular item, so we will take a motion on this once we're ready.
Well, this is a great effort. I'll move approval.
I'll second.
Very good. I have a motion and a second. Go ahead with the clerk. Go ahead and call the roll.
Senator Delgado, Board Member Krakow,
Yes.
Councilmember Benoit.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Mitchell,
Yes.
Supervisor Rutherford,
Yes.
Chair Benoit.
Yes.
Motion passes 4 ayes.
Very good. All right, we'll go ahead and go on to the next item. This is just an informational item on the summary proposed rule 1407, control of toxic air contaminant emissions from chromium alloy melting operations. Michael Morris, go right ahead.
Good morning, Councilmember Benoit and committee members. Next slide, please. So I'll be providing a brief on our proposed rule 1407.1. And this rule will be regulating toxic air contaminant emissions from chromium alloy metal melting operations. You can see a picture here of an uncontrolled chromium metal melting operation. And it would be helpful to point out that over the past several decades, the thought behind the emissions related to these types of operations is that there's some small amount of particulates, but there wasn't very much concern about metal toxics until just recently. And some of the indications that we noticed was that there was the possibility that there was hexavalent chromium being formed during the operations like this. And so in 2015, we began a rule development process, which, if you recall, in late 2018, we came to Stationary Source Committee and had a rather contentious committee meeting regarding this item. And we were asked to find a new pathway to come up with some type of resolution to how to proceed with this rule meeting. At that time, we were just proposing to doing testing, but we have worked with the California Metals Coalition and come up with a path forward. Next slide, please. So what ended up happening was the California Metals Coalition and 2 of their members volunteered to do anonymous testing through a third-party source testing company. And we were able to get information that both confirmed that there was hexavalent chromium formation from these operations, and because of our good fortune that these 2 facilities had state-of-the-art control technology, HEPA filters, that would be sufficient to make sure that the emissions, the hexavalent chromium emissions from these operations, was reduced sufficiently to be health protective for the surrounding communities. This was a very big moment, both for air pollution nerds like myself, who were excited to breaking science that there was hexavalent chromium emissions from these operations. And there isn't any textbook or EPA guidance or anything like that discussing this type of operation. So this is very much cutting edge. And also for the facilities that would be subject to this rule, there is a pathway for them forward so that they know what they need to do in order to comply with the rule and make sure that they're reducing emissions appropriately. Next slide, please. So this rule will basically round out the control of metal melting for in previous rules, we had already regulated lead melting operations through our 1420 series rule. Aluminum melting, brass and bronze, they're covered by 1407. This rule will cover chromium alloys, which are steel and stainless steel, and also some super alloys. In these metals basically have never been under a source specific rule. And so this is covering this regulatory gap and ensuring that these types of operations don't create any type of unsafe condition for nearby residents. Next slide, please. So part of the regulation will require control through devices like HEPA filters, or in some cases, ULPA filters, which are ultra low particulate air filters. The level of emission control will depend on the distance to the nearby receptor. And it will require that initially and then every 5 years, that they do source testing to confirm that the equipment is working properly. Next slide, please. We've also learned from some of our other toxics rules that it's important to regulate the fugitive emissions from these types of facilities. So we will be having and including enhanced housekeeping and building enclosures as part of the regulation. Next slide, please. We will also have monitoring requirements that will ensure that the control equipment is operating properly and that there aren't any cross drafts or other types of things that might interfere with the functioning of the control equipment. And an added provision that we have in here is that if they fail to do this parameter monitoring, that a source test will be required within 6 months. Next slide, please. So there are 11 facilities that are impacted by this rule, and it is a substantial cost for them to put in the HEPA filter technology, but we do believe that this will reduce the emissions sufficiently. And with that, we have worked closely with our sources. Next slide, please. So
we're hearing the Spanish translation on the English line.
Yeah, if we could pause for a second, there's a translation issue.
We're working on it.
I'll go ahead and continue then. Thank you.
Go ahead.
With the help of the California Metals Coalition and the stakeholders, we have resolved all those issues that were so much at the forefront in 2018. We do have a path forward at this point and a full regulation as opposed to testing requirements. We're very pleased with the outcome as how we got to this point. And we are scheduled for a public hearing in January of 2021. With that, that concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
Very good. Board member comments or questions before public comments? Not seeing any hands raised. I'll go ahead and take a public comment at this time. James Simonelli, go ahead, James.
Yes, good morning again to the board. This is James Simonelli, Executive Director of the California Metals Coalition. We volunteered the facilities to do the testing. I want to be very, very concise here at how well we worked with staff and the leadership from the executive officer all the way down. Mike did reference there was some contention a couple of years ago on this. But the fact we came together, the fact that we did this testing together meant a lot to the industry, and it helped us make a rule based on science. So I want to thank a lot of people, but My brevity does not equate our thankfulness to working together. I have two comments that I want to make. One is what we learned from the test results. As Mike alluded to, there's not a lot of information out there on the conversion of chromium to hexavalent chromium in these facilities. And what we learned is a couple of things. One is at the melt, it does create a lot of hexavalent chromium in the thousands of nanograms right at the melt. So we put a sensor right at the melt. We also put a sensor before the controls, and just the movement of air from the melt prior to the controls, it went from thousands of nanograms to the teens. And as we explore the science of what's going on, our industry is trying to understand why. And I think the district is trying to understand why, what's happening between the melt and prior to the controls, why we're seeing such a huge reduction in hexavalent chromium. Then beyond that, once you get to the pollution controls, there was a sensor after the pollution controls that showed it was at non-detect. So you're going from the teens to a non-detect. Our industry has invested in Vanderbilt University that's doing a test on what's happening of the science between the melts and prior to the controls. I think they'll be reaching out to the Air District maybe for comments. But we're learning a lot about this, and I wanted to comment on that. The second thing I wanted to comment on is it is a significant cost. And because we went through the science, because we went through this with you, the industry is making that investment. We do want to caution, though, is that as multiple rules come in front of you that impact our industry, that investment needs to be taken into account, especially during these times going forward. So I thank everybody from staff. We support this rule moving forward. And I just wanted to convey on behalf of our association our support. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you, James. Jason Gutierrez. Jason?
Good morning. My name is Jason Gutierrez with Griswold Industries. I just wanted to first off state that we are an essential business, and we've been operating through this pandemic and working extremely hard to keep our employees safe on a day-to-day basis with adhering to the ever-changing guidelines county to county. We wanted to thank the district for the efforts that have been made to work together in developing this rule. The ability to work together in effective communication between us and the district and CMC has been amazing. We've also worked together to help explain processes, describe materials in order to assist in any way possible. In addition, we understand the financial impact of this proposed rule and are willing to make investments. However, we would also like the board to be aware that there are compounding rules that are in development and in effect that will impact our industry. We've had several businesses in our industry that have moved or closed due to the cost of compliance in our state. But businesses that will be impacted by this rule have been making investments in their facilities, in addition to spending a lot of funding in the COVID compliance. Timing is tough due to the ongoing pandemic, and the financial impact of compounding rules can just be really devastating. But overall, on 1407.1, I really just wanted to thank the district and the rule writing committee. We've been, happy to work together. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Any other public comments on this item? Again, *9 if you're on the phone, or the raise hand button should be at the lower bottom of your screen or on the participants list. Not seeing any other comments at this time. Bring it back to the panel. Councilmember Mitchell, go right ahead.
I just want to comment and congratulate all of the participants in this process together to find a resolution on this. Some of you are newer to the board, so you may not have been here when this issue arose. We had a number of town halls in Paramount, and we all experienced the community very angry at us because we had not been able prior to that to detect hex chromium and where it was coming from. And then on the other side of the coin, we had a lot of the industry yelling at us because there were a number of people very much afraid they would lose their jobs when we regulated this. So I have to say, this is really nice coming here a few years later and seeing the waters have calmed and we have found a good regulatory process and that industry engaged with us. to find those results. So I want to thank all of you for your work on this and congratulate you for a good result.
Great comments, and I can completely agree. This was definitely a very contentious issue when it first came forward, and it's very positive to hear both sides at this point coming to where we're at right now. So that's great. Any other panelists or questions?
Yeah, just thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. This seems like a real success story. Want to applaud staff as well as Mr. Simonelli and his members for really seems like a job well done, and I'd like to move the item.
I believe this is just a informational item, but thank you for that.
Okay, well, if I could have moved it, I would have been.
Very good. All right, with that, we'll, unless there's any other questions, we'll go ahead and go on to item number 3, the proposed rule 1150.3, emissions of oxide from nitric combustion equipment at landfills. Michael Morris, go right ahead.
Hello again, good morning. Next slide, please.
Mr. Chair. Excuse me, Councilor, Mr. Krakow, go right ahead.
Yes, this is an item that I have to recuse myself out of an abundance of caution due to my work for the California Waste and Recycling Association. So I'm going to recuse on this item and I'll come back for item 4. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
All right, Michael, go right ahead.
Okay, next slide, please.
And Mr. Chair, if I might have a moment as well, I believe Mayor Mitchell doesn't have a financial interest, but would like to identify that she's a member, a board member alternate for the LA County Sand District, which is involved in this item.
I am no longer on the Sanitation District Board, so I do not need to make that announcement.
All right.
I was on that board last year. Bay, thanks for reminding me. I was on that board last year.
Okay.
I've rotated off that board. Thank you.
Great. We'll make a note of that.
Very good. Any other recusals? All right. Go right ahead.
Sure. This rule will regulate combustion equipment at landfills and landfill-to-gas energy facilities. We are putting a source-specific rule together because these types of facilities have unique challenges. In particular, the contaminants that are in the landfill gas make it very challenging to control emissions from the combustion sources, and the quality of the landfill gas deteriorates over time. And so with these two challenges, we decided to create a separate rule for them, go through the BART assessment for the combustion equipment located at these facilities, and propose NOx limits for this equipment. Next slide, please. So this rule applies to 7 landfill and gas to energy facilities, and the equipment that will be subject to this rule are boilers and turbines. We did not include engines. There was a BART assessment that included the landfill gas for them, and so they'll stay in Rule 1110.2. Next slide, please. So the rule will, like other source-specific rules on the NOx side, it'll include emission limits and averaging times, as well as startup and shutdown provisions. It'll have a schedule for testing and monitoring, as well as record keeping. And finally, they'll be asked to revise their permit to reflect the changes in the rule. Next slide, please. So we do go through the BART assessment, as I mentioned earlier. The BART assessment basically is a review of technology locally, technology across the nation, what other types of regulations and permit limits are out there, and looking at what might be coming up in future technologies, making it an initial BART assessment, and creating an initial BART emission limit, and then from there doing a cost effectiveness analysis to get at a final BART emission limit. And in doing so, we ran into several challenges on the turbine side, where some of the turbine equipment wouldn't be cost effective to change out, primarily because the equipment is relatively recently installed, and so there'd be a high cost for assets that would that were recently just put into the system. Next slide, please. So we'd be proposing emission limits here. They include both NOx limits and CO limits. And we do distinguish between equipment turbines that are with post-combustion control and without post-combustion control. For the units that do have post-combustion control, these are the ones that did face some unique challenges. And so we're providing that the limits that we have proposed here will become effective upon turbine replacement. Next slide, please. So this rule will reduce approximately 0.15 tons per day of NOx. Much of it comes from the boilers. There is some small amount that will come from the turbines. The cost effectiveness for this rule is approximately $27,000 per ton of NOx reduced. And that covers both the replacement costs or retrofit costs for the boilers, as well as permit revisions for the boilers and turbines. Next slide, please. So at this point, we're a little early because we do have a December, the December stationary source, it won't be held. And so we're still working with our stakeholders to make sure that we've worked through all the details of the rule. At this point, we don't have any key issues. And our rule is scheduled to be heard in February of next year. Thank you. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Very good. Board member questions before we go to the attendees? Not seeing anyone raising their hand. Go ahead and take a public comment. David Rothbart. David, go ahead. David, you appear to be unmuted. Can you go ahead? David, I saw you mute and then unmute again. So, whoop, and you're muted again. Yep. Not hearing you, David.
While you're waiting for that, this is Vanessa. I've joined by phone.
Very good. Thank you for joining. Well, David, if you want to maybe try calling back in, we're not hearing you on your device. You are unmuted, but it looks like you're not able to transmit audio. So I don't know if you have a local mute button on your device or some other cause that's having that issue, but we're not hearing you, David. I'll go ahead and bring it back to the panel for discussion, and if staff sees that David is becoming gone, if you could let me know, and we can try and get him back in. Do any of my staff or board members have a comments or questions on this? I'm not seeing anyone. We'll give David here one more second to see if he's going to chime back in. Yeah, I'm not seeing him on the attendee side. So David, maybe it's a general public comment if you want to try again, and we'll get you in there. All right, unless there's any other board member questions, we'll go ahead and go to item number 4. All right, item number 4, the Community Emissions Reduction Plan for Southeast Los Angeles. Danielle Garcia, go right ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. My name is Dan Garcia. I'm a Planning and Rules Manager, and today I'll be presenting the Southeast Los Angeles Community Emission Reduction Plan. Mr. Chair, before I move into the presentation, I do want to acknowledge that today's presentation was developed over a week ago, and since that time, we have received additional feedback from the Community Steering Committee and a few key requests. These include items such as a goal to eliminate community exposure to metal toxic air contaminants to the extent feasible, as well as additional actions focusing on zero emission technology for the 710 freeway and encouraging green space in the community. With that being said, staff is incorporating each of these requests into the plan, and they'll be reflected in the plan that's submitted to the board on December 4th.
Very good.
Okay, so before I get into the details of the community emission reduction plan, I do want to provide a brief overview of the AB 617 program here at South Coast AQMD. As the committee may recall, in September of 2018, the governing board recommended 3 communities for the AB 617 program. Next slide, please. These communities include Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach, East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights, West Commerce, and the community of San Bernardino, Muscoy. In September of 2019, the governing board adopted the community emission reduction plan for each of these communities and are currently being implemented. Also at that time, the board recommended 2 additional communities for the program, including Southeast Los Angeles and Eastern Coachella Valley. Next slide, please. The AB 617 program really fundamentally is a community emission reduction program. But with that said, the state law does have a few requirements for the program, including the adoption of the plan 1 year from when a community is selected, and requirements such as emission reduction strategy requirements and metrics and targets and other important elements. Next slide, please. One of the first steps really after selecting a community is establishing the community boundary. For Southeast Los Angeles, the community boundary includes nearly 300,000 residents and is 95% Latino. This community is a highly urbanized community, and it includes the cities of Southgate, Bell Gardens, Cudahy, Huntington Park, and the unincorporated portions of Los Angeles County neighborhoods, the Florence, Firestone, and Walnut Park. Some really important sources of air pollution that impact this community are the Alameda Corridor, the 710 freeway, as well as industrial and commercial operations. Next slide, please. In addition to establishing a community boundary, a community steering committee is also established. For Southeast Los Angeles, this includes 44 members. These members are primarily active residents, community organizations, businesses, agencies, schools, and as well as elected officials. Next slide, please. So I just want to point out the SERP development timeline. This is approximately a 1-year timeline, and I just want to highlight that it's a very fast-moving process that really is driven by state law. As I mentioned in my earlier slide, before the law requires the plan to be developed and adopted in a 1-year time frame. As many of you know, this is not characteristic of most community planning processes that often take years to develop. However, this community steering committee really wanted to get to work, and they spent about 9 months of their time developing the SERP and asked staff to provide informational materials to help them develop goals and actions for the plan. And they depended primarily on a consensus building process. Next slide, please. Through that process, the CSC identified 6 air quality priorities. Those 6 air quality priorities are truck traffic and freeways, rendering facilities, green spaces, metal processing facilities, rail yards and locomotives, as well as the general industrial facilities. Next slide, please. Some of the key SERP development efforts included 9 CSC meetings, 2 technical advisory group meetings, as well as a question and answer session, in which we discussed the draft SERP, and over 40 one-on-one meetings with CSC members and various community members. Also, the community did request that we provide them a number of pieces of information. To respond to that request, we held workshops where we provided very detailed information on the air quality priorities, such as truck traffic and freeways and metal processing facilities. Additionally, we did develop informational handouts on things like Rule 415, which covers rendering facilities, and obviously, rendering facilities being the key concern for this community. Next slide, please. So through the SERP development efforts, the CSC ultimately identified 9 emission and exposure reduction goals. Those goals are achieved through 44 actions that are in the plan. Each action is based on a strategy really such as enforcement or rule development, as well as incentives. Next slide, please. As I mentioned in my previous slide, there are 44 actions. So obviously I won't be able to cover each of those actions today, but I do want to highlight a few of the key actions that the committee included in the plan. For truck traffic and freeways, one of the actions is to provide outreach to small businesses and local fleets for incentive funds, prioritizing zero emissions where commercially available. As you see in this action, small business is emphasized because the community does have an interest in protecting its small businesses. Additionally, as I mentioned before, the community has a concern about rendering facilities, but does realize that we have a rule on rendering facilities, that's Rule 415. And so what they've asked us to do in this action is allow the implementation of Rule 415, and after the engineering controls are put in place, to identify any remaining odor concerns and evaluate the need for additional requirements. And green spaces has been long been a concern for this community, the lack of green space. And so the committee prioritized in one of the actions working with the CSC and as well as state and local agencies to identify and prioritize locations for installing vegetative buffers near freeways. Next slide, please. And also metal processing facilities are a very significant concern for this community. Jillian in today's presentation identified some things that we're working on to help resolve some of these matters. But in the SERP, there's additional commitments. One of the key concerns for this community was metal recycling facilities. And so we do have a commitment in the SERP to initiate rule development for metal recycling facilities. Also, rail yards and locomotives. This community, like many AB 617 communities, is impacted by the logistics industry, and particularly rail yards and locomotives. And they prioritized for one of their actions, pursuing the replacement of older diesel fuel equipment and with low emission technology. And finally, general industrial facilities. This category is a little bit broader than the other 5 categories. And the committee realized that the kind of how broad in scope this category is. And what they asked us to do is to continue to work with them to identify and prioritize specific industrial facilities of concern in the community and collect information about the facilities that might help us identify both emission and exposure reduction measures if necessary. Next slide, please. So looking forward to the next steps, as I mentioned in the very beginning of the presentation, staff is working to incorporate recent comments received from the CSC. Those will be incorporated and heard at our December board meeting, where we will seek adoption of the SERP. And if adopted, implementation of this particular plan will begin as soon as January in 2021. So that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair. I'll be available for any questions.
Very good. First, I just want to thank staff for their hard work on this, and I know myself and Councilmember Mitchell and Councilmember Krakoff, and I think Senator Delgado have also all been able to participate in some of these meetings, and just happy to hear what's been going on and the movement that's going forward. Other board member comments before I take public comment?
Board member Mitchell and I had the opportunity to sit in the last CSC meeting, and there seemed to be broad support, unanimous, about all of staff's hard work on this. I just want to thank all the CSC members for putting in all the time, and for our staff working so hard on this item. and the next item and all the other CSC things. Joe K and hi, I'm Jason, Pedro, Dan, Robert, Valerie, Diane, Arlene, Wayne, Gina, probably missing some names. It's really taken a village to get this done. Look forward to hearing from the public comment, and maybe Judy, Board Member Mitchell can speak to this too, but there seemed to be broad consensus that this is a very good SERP.
Yeah, let me just say that, I've tried to attend as many of these as I can. And I want to commend the staff that are presiding over these meetings of the steering committees. They are excellent facilitators. And as Gideon mentioned, he and I were at the last meeting, which was just yesterday or the day before, and where they were finalizing the SERP, and they really went out of their way to solicit comments from the steering committee on what was in front of them to make sure that they had captured all of the issues that were of concern to the committee. This is a big part of the workload that the Air District is doing now. And I have previously encouraged our board members to tune into some of these steering committee meetings. I think that they're very valuable, especially if there is one in your own community. And I note that on this steering committee, there are 6 elected persons. And I encourage all these steering committees, wherever they're formed, to try to obtain elected people on their steering committee, because as we've noted, land use is often one of the issues. Sometimes it's truck routes, and the location of warehouses next to residential. So there are a lot of issues that local elected officials have control over and could help the steering committees through this process. So anyway, thank you to the staff. They're excellent, and it's a lot of work, but very enlightening. I think it's such a good process that is put into place through AB 617.
Very good. Couldn't agree more. I do have one public comment on this item. I'll go ahead and take that now. Chris Chavez. Chris, go right ahead.
Yes, thank you, Board Member Benoit, and all the members of the Stationary Source Committee. My apologies. I do want to join in and express my appreciation to the staff for this process, particularly given the adverse circumstances that they were operating under. Also, just want to recognize the board members who have participated in this process. I know Board Member Mitchell has been involved with both the Year 1 and Year 2 communities. Board Member Krakoff, Board Member Delgado, I know has attended a few as well. So certainly want to thank the ones that have participated in this. Coalition for Clean Air, Deputy Policy Director for Coalition for Clean Air, just wanted to provide some comments. We did submit a letter regarding the discussion draft SERP. I know that a lot of information is still being obtained, and certainly we were willing to accept and work with the district on that. But in terms of some of our comments, I just wanted to distill them very quickly. First, we would want to make sure that the emission reductions achieved by the SERP are real emission reductions. I know one of the things that we frequently have mentioned in our comments is using the same criteria for the State Implementation Plan, or SIP. But again, the real angle there is making sure that we're seeing real reductions, not just achieving paper compliance. Certainly, as the information on reductions comes forward or is processed, it'll be interesting and hopefully seeing some major results for the community. We also want to see the district take an aggressive stance in combating some of the environmental justice issues, longstanding environmental justice issues in the district. The 710 freeway expansion is going to be have significant impacts on the community. Really making sure that any sort of project really moves towards electrifying transportation and reducing emissions in the district without just adding capacity and putting more diesel trucks on the road. Taking a stand and continuing to aggressively pursue Exide, which impacted both the East LA and Southeast LA communities, is also going to be very important. Making sure that the strategies that broadly commit to further study actually develop concrete solutions and concrete action plans in the future is going to be very important. Also, we just want to reiterate our concern that the SERP, all SERPs rely heavily on incentives and encourage AQMD to increase enforcement and increase the stringency of rules, as well as continue our support for a strong indirect source rule for warehouses and rail yards. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. And I also made it to a couple meetings, but I'm sure you didn't mean to leave me out there. Just great comments, and yeah, just all around great job on this, and thank you all. Any other public comments on this? You hit the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen right now, or hit *9 on your phone. And I am not seeing anyone else coming up. Any other comments or questions from our committee? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank Mr. Chavez and his organization for very, very active participation in all these 617s. I know Chris is a member of the Carson-Wilmington steering committee, but has also been active in the Southeast LA committee as well. And this is a real good plan, but now it's incumbent on all of us to implement it. And there's some tough stuff in here. There's stuff that's incumbent on our board to take action on as well in 2021 and beyond. And as hard as it is to write the plans, probably even harder to implement them and to actually get the emissions reduction. So that's the challenge that we all face now, and look forward to working with everybody, all stakeholders and our board and staff in achieving that goal.
If I could, Mr. Chair, just comment on that, because it made me think of a few things. A lot of the plans here in the South Coast depend on for their implementation on adopting independent source rules. And so I think that our board should be aware of that. And as those rules come up before us in the next year or so, we should keep in mind that that's part of the implementation plans on many of these SERPs. So just something to note.
Absolutely. Great comments, both from you and Gideon. I absolutely agree with a lot of it. It's going to be a hard lift, but it's absolutely the path we're on. All right, we'll go ahead and go on to the next item unless there's any other comments. All right, we'll go on to the Community Relations Reduction Plan for Eastern Coachella Valley. Mr. Garcia, go right ahead.
Okay. All right, Mr. Chair, again, Dan Garcia, Planning and Rules Manager and currently leading the AB 617 efforts with Dr. Gosh. I want to, before I jump into today's presentation on the Eastern Coachella Valley, similar to the Southeast Los Angeles plan, this particular presentation was developed a week ago as well. And since that time, we have also received comments from the CSC and a few specific requests. One of those requests has been a request for more time to develop additional details of the plan, excuse me. And also some of those details would include things like specific monitoring objectives and identifying monitoring locations. The committee has also asked for additional time to address specific concerns around issues such as locomotives or air quality concerns around locomotives. So because of that, staff is proposing at this time to address as many of these concerns in the plan by the December board hearing, and also committing to bring the plan back to the board in mid-2021 for an amendment to address outstanding concerns that were recently identified. Additionally, I want to add, we did receive a request to have additional CSC meeting between essentially yesterday and this particular committee meeting and the board hearing. So we are open as staff to holding an additional community steering committee on the week of the 30th, which is basically the first week of December. So, okay, next slide, please. So, Mr. Chair, in kind of the interest of time, the slide 2 and 3 are essentially the same slides from the previous presentation and really just provide background information on the AB 617 program. So I'm going to go ahead and get into the details of the Eastern Coachella Valley SERP and move to slide 4. All right, so the Eastern Coachella Valley community is unique from many of the other AB 617 communities in that it's a rural community and that has a population of 80,000. The community is predominantly Latino, 92%, and about 6% white and less than 1% Black. This community stretches from the city of Indio south to the Riverside County portion of the Salton Sea. It includes the cities of Coachella, a small portion of the city of La Quinta, and the unincorporated areas of Thermal, Mecca, Oasis, and North Shore. Some of the local sources of air pollution in the Eastern Coachella Valley include fugitive dust from roadways, as well as exposure to the Salton Sea playa, illegal burning of waste, and pesticides, trucks, and power generation. Next slide, please. The Community Steering Committee for this particular community started out at about 50 members, and it's presently now at about 38. The members are primarily active residents, community organizations, businesses, agencies, tribal organizations, and elected officials. A majority of the members are actually also live in the community. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, the SERP development timeline is really a one-year time frame, and it's incredibly fast-moving. And that timeline is driven really by state law. Also, as I mentioned before, the law basically requires the plan to not only be developed within that one-year time frame, but also to be adopted. During this one-year time frame, this community had significant input on process. The community had a lot of interest in governance, and a key concern for them was developing a charter. Next slide, please. So to develop that charter, the committee had, we had 4 charter working group meetings where CSC members provided line by line feedback on the charter, and staff circulated multiple drafts of the charter with CSC edits. Ultimately, on September 24th, the CSC voted in favor of the charter. And in that charter, some of the key items is an establishment of roles and responsibilities of the Community Steering Committee. Next slide, please. This committee identified numerous air quality priorities. However, here, these are the air quality priorities that really rose to the highest priority, or highest level, I would say. Those are the Salton Sea, pesticides, fugitive road dust, open burning and illegal dumping, as well as diesel mobile sources, and the Greenleaf Desert View power plant. Next slide, please. So some of the key SERP development or community emission reduction development efforts included a total of 16 community meetings. That is 9 CSC meetings, 4 charter working group meetings, as well as the Q&A session, and 50 small group meetings with CSC members, and as well as 2 technical advisory group meetings. Additionally, the committee did ask for informational workshops. So we did hold some informational workshops in collaboration with other agencies such as the Imperial Irrigation District and the Department of Pesticide Regulation. We also provided informational handouts on open burning, fugitive road dust, the Salton Sea, and pesticides, and as well as fact sheets on the Brown Act, CERT development timelines, as well as the various sources of air pollution in the community, and the Coachella Valley ozone standard update. Next slide, please. So through the development process, the CSC identified 14 emission and exposure reduction goals, and those goals are achieved really through 50 different actions within the plan. Each action is based on a strategy such as enforcement and incentives, and as well as community outreach. I will point out that community outreach was really important to this community as well, as it is a rural community, and obviously there are additional barriers with community outreach in many rural communities. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there's about 50 actions in the plan, and I'll go over some of those key actions here in the next 2 slides. For the Salton Sea, 3 actions that the committee had an interest in was identifying opportunities to expand monitoring of H2S and PM10, as well as pursuing collaboration to support dust suppression projects, and pursuing funding opportunities to install air filtration systems in schools and homes near the Salton Sea. While all of the air quality priorities are obviously important to the community, the Salton Sea, I think by far the community recognizes is probably one of the top concerns in this community. Additionally, the plan includes actions for pesticides. One of the key actions is to consult with DPR and the Riverside County Ag Commissioner to evaluate the feasibility of developing a notification system pilot project. Additionally, fugitive dust is, for that particular priority, one of the key actions is to pursue collaboration to pave unpaved roads and parks within the community. Next slide, please. For open burning, the community had an interest in pursuing opportunities to develop really an online notification. This notification system, this system would help inform the community when permitted burning is expected to occur. And for diesel mobile sources and the Greenleaf Desert Power Plant, the committee did not obviously have wanted to kind of keep these categories a little bit more broad, with opportunity to come back and hopefully add additional details to these in the next 6 months. However, some of the key actions for diesel mobile sources includes collaborating with CARB to identify opportunities for focus enforcement and additional regulatory measures, as well as identifying incentive opportunities to replace on-road and off-road equipment and school buses with cleaner technology. And for the Greenleaf Desert Power Plant, one of the key actions is to work with the CSC to identify air quality concerns relating to the facility and to develop additional actions such as including low-cost sensor deployment and additional strategies to reduce emissions. And like I mentioned, this is one of the categories that we are hoping to provide additional details in the next 6 months when we come back to the board for an amendment in mid-2021. Okay, so next slide, please. All right, so moving forward, we're going to continue to accept comments, and as I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, we're open to having an additional community steering committee in the first week of December. So we'll continue to take comment and on the discussion draft SERP, and in December we would seek board adoption of SERPs. This slide is, as I mentioned, a little outdated. So in 2021, we would actually begin implementation of the SERP, but additionally here, there would be a commitment, as I mentioned before, to come back to the board for an amendment in the middle of 2021. Okay, so Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation.
Very good. Board member comments, questions on this one?
Yeah, So thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you, Mr. Garcia, for the presentation. This has been a challenging process to get this SERP done in the middle of a pandemic. It really has been difficult, and I want to thank all of the folks in the CSC for participating through this process. It's a wonderful group of folks in the CSC. We had meetings over the summer every week on this charter issue. I think for at least 1 or 2 months, 4 meetings a month that had broad participation. I'm not going to read every staff member's name again, but that same group of staff stood by this process, and we got pinched for time. The path that we're on now seems, in my view, to be a good path. We have a statutory deadline to meet. We should meet it. But that being said, we're going to have another meeting now, hopefully the week of November 30th, to highlight any additional things that may need to be cleaned up in the SERP in the first or second quarter of next year. We have a commitment from our staff to do so. That meeting will help, I think, narrow the issues to see what's left, if anything. And then the board can have an organized board meeting on this in December 4th. There's precedent for doing this. I believe San Diego also had some timing issues with their SERP in the year 1 community. And again, we did this, our staff did this, our CSC did this in the middle of a pandemic. So it hasn't been easy. We are being realistic while also meeting our deadlines. And there's been ups and downs. It's been a bit of a bumpy process. And I'm excited to hear the public comment in a few minutes. But the path that's been set forward by our staff seems to be a fair one, balancing the needs of the city and our statutory obligations. And I believe we're on a good path here, notwithstanding all of the challenges we've all had to face in this process. So thank you for letting me get on the soapbox there for a minute, Vice Chair.
No, it was a good soapbox. Thank you, Gideon, for bringing all that up. I appreciate it. All right, any other board member comments? I do have some public comment. Go ahead and take public comment this time.
Hear the public comment. Yeah.
Yep, that's what I was getting to. First public commenter is Cochita Pazar.
Sí, buenas tardes. Sí, me escucho.
Afternoon, yes, we can.
Ok, muchísimas gracias por la oportunidad de dar mi comentario público. Soy miembro del CSC del Este Valle de Coachella. Gracias, Dan, por hacer la presentación de nuestra comunidad. Solamente quisiera enfocar un poco más que las prioridades de la comunidad. Las estamos hablando ya desde un año y que por favor sí prioricen lo que nosotros estemos hablando. En cada tema de las prioridades que hemos hablado, se nos escuche de lo que estamos pidiendo sobre la laguna, sobre el polvo fugitivo, porque creo que no han incluido el polvo que elevan las motos en nuestra comunidad. Sensores de bajo costo, pienso que no vamos a tener resultados de los que queremos. Nosotros necesitamos resultados ya que nos puedan ayudar un poco más a seguir hacia adelante. Tener sensores de bajo costo sería otra vez estar haciendo lo mismo, porque no nos dan los resultados que nosotros queremos. Solamente quiero dar ese comentario a todos ustedes que están presentes. Gracias por darnos la oportunidad de opinar nuestro comentario público, que se escuchen los comentarios públicos, que se escuche lo que necesita la comunidad, porque como ustedes nos han dicho, nosotros somos los expertos y sabemos lo que necesitamos. Nosotros les estamos diciendo lo que necesitamos, pero yo siento que ustedes no me están escuchando. Muchísimas gracias, Dan. Muchísimas gracias, Arlene, por hacer el trabajo en el este de Coachella.
Thank you for your comments, and we hear you. Thank you. Rebecca Zangora?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Rebecca, go ahead. And I'm sorry about your last name there.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rebecca Zaragoza with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability in the Eastern Coachella Valley. I'm also a CSC member in the ECV. First, I just want to thank and appreciate Board Member Krakow's involvement in the ECV process and for his comments today, and also appreciating staff's efforts to work with the CSC through a pandemic. However, I am here to ask you not to approve this plan and direct staff to incorporate the comments included in a joint CSC comment letter submitted on November 13th. Overall, the process that has been followed in the ECV, as Conchita has mentioned already, has not respected the community-led spirit that AB 617 envisioned. We have been pushed through a rushed process, and the result of that is an incomplete and ineffective SERP. We are only seeing actions that outline more collaboration and relationship building with other agencies. And although we do believe they are important, they lack direction in terms of how these actions will actually lead to emission reduction. The draft is also missing several air quality priorities that the CSC raised throughout the year that have not been included or acknowledged in the draft. But we want to see AQMD address and incorporate our comments before approving this plan. These include addressing off-roading, the thermal racetrack, the thermal airport, the freight train, and land use issues, identifying and achieving real quantifiable emission reduction targets and actions, as well as mitigation strategies for all 6 priorities, expanding air monitoring to address toxic air contaminants and different pesticide contaminants, and also improving the timeline for implementation of the plan. To do this, AQMD staff should present a resolution that states the SERP is currently incomplete and in progress and outlines their timeline for incorporating the feedback that we've provided through December 4th or after if necessary. But I do want to thank you, Dan, and others for responding to our request and already committing to meeting with the CSC before December 4th. But we would also want more frequent meetings in 2021 of at least once a month. Until we see these changes in the plan and commitments presented to the CSC, we do not support the approval of this plan. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next, Patricia Leal. Patricia?
Yes, hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patricia Leal Gutierrez, and I'm with Alianza Coachella Valley, and I'm also a CSC member in the Eastern Coachella Valley. I want to start off by saying as well my gratitude and thanks to Board Member Krakow and the staff for working with us through this process in the Eastern Coachella Valley. As a CSC member, however, I feel that there's a lot of progress that can still be made. And very similar to the comments that Rebecca and Conchita uplifted, part of my comment for today is to request a resolution stating that the plan, again, is incomplete and it's still in progress, and really include a clear timeline that addresses for the first quarter of 2021 to really for incorporating all of the feedback that was sent through a community letter to the staff, and addressing the comments and updating the plan with such recommendations, and of course the commitment to finish incorporating these feedbacks. We're aware that we are in a pandemic. There's a lot of needs and issues in the Eastern Coachella Valley, and we understand that time is of the essence right now. And we, I think part of the conversation is building that trust and commitment that these comments and issues will be addressed through an updated SERP. And part of it is, until we see an updated SERP, I think that the community, including myself, will feel more comfortable in reviewing and building that trust to make sure that the priorities are being uplifted and thought throughout with strategies and ways that commit emission reductions throughout time. So very similar, really highlighting including emission reductions and targets over time, outlining the baselines, the measures, and the monitoring. These are some of the components that are still missing, and very much the request for off-roading and including ATVs and motorcycles. That's something that has been stressed since the very beginning. With that, I also request that as we continue to develop this plan, being able to meet at least once a month in the upcoming year, and having clear goals and a timeline that this plan will be completed to the most of its ability by the beginning of next year, and not necessarily stressing it throughout the second quarter. Thank you, and I really appreciate everyone's time and commitment.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Bay Gonzalez. Bay?
Yes, good morning. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I want to echo the comments of my fellow CSC members as well. I do appreciate, the process, but as well, I do not feel that it is complete. And oftentimes, it has not really been led by community discussion. At many of the meetings, South Coast staff has herded the conversation and the vote if it's not in the favor that in the direction that they are wanting the conversation to go. And we've had many, many discussions in regards to that sentiment that we all share. And with that said, I'm really happy to hear Dan change his tune this morning and saying that we could have another meeting next week, because I know last night there was a urgency and no time, and the holidays were coming, and I understand all of that. But I'm really glad to hear that they are now willing to have a meeting, which they weren't open to yesterday, to be able to address the letter. I am one of the CSC members that signed on to the letter, and I do feel that it is very important for all of that to be taken into consideration, because although we keep hearing that this is a community-driven process, many, many times it has not felt that way, throughout several of the meetings. And of course, as community members, we are very interested in seeing this through and working through it and working with it. But we honestly need to come to some type of a consensus where the feel of the meetings and the process is actually community driven, and that our conversations and votes are not hijacked or herded in a certain direction. So just with that, I just want to again echo and support the comments made by my fellow CSC members. I do want to thank Board Member Gideon Krakow for all of his work and all of his efforts in mitigating some of the conversations and concerns. So with that, thank you very much, and just wishing everyone a great rest of your day.
Very good, thank you. Any other comments from the public? Star 9 if you're on your phone, or the raise hand button on Zoom. Ryan Sinclair, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add my support and voice to the group that's already spoken about the letter that we all signed, and that we need to make sure that this resolution is just state that it's incomplete and get a clear timeline for incorporating the feedback. I just wanted to state that, but also really acknowledge the work that the AQMD staff has done on this already. I mean, there's been a lot of meetings they've been to, and also acknowledge Board Member Gideon and I'm also a member of the San Bernardino AB 617, and the differences are really, they're very different. So it's a very different process, and I really appreciate the flexibility that everybody has to sort of adapt this process to the Eastern Coachella Valley. But again, I do want to state my support for the community. I mean, the community also has really come together. I've seen community groups in this process of the AB 617 come together and start agreeing on things that, maybe they wouldn't have done that before, but now they are. And it's really amazing and encouraging to see that. So also, I wanted to acknowledge the sort of the spirit of collaboration everybody has, and it's an amazing thing. And with that, I'm just gonna end my comment.
Very good, thank you for your comments. Any other comments, public comments? First, I just want to say thank you for all of your comments. And I know this has been a difficult process with COVID and with timing and with our statutory limits. But Mr. Nastri, do you have a response for some of the concerns and questions that have come forward?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, as Board Member Krakow said, this has been a very challenging year. And, you know, we have done more communities in the AB 617 program than any of the other air districts in the state. And this program isn't new to us. And being in the community isn't new to us. I think that with ECV, the challenge has been not only the distance, but perhaps some of the historical perspective that's built up over the years. And the challenge of not being able to sit face to face has created, or perhaps added to, already existing uncertainty and perhaps lack of confidence in our organization. But I assure you that staff has made every effort to listen, to be respectful of the community, to take direction from the community, and to also advise the community. And I think as in any community, you have a chorus of different voices. Some people want to go left, some people want to go right, some people want to go down the center. And the challenge for us is how do we get to where we meet the statutory obligations under AB 617 to develop a SERP in compliance. And what you're hearing today is a diversity of views. And the challenge that we have is to try to get everybody together. And that's frankly difficult to do. And you have to look no further than what's going on in our nation today to see the polarization that goes on throughout our communities. But throughout it all, staff has constantly tried to be respectful. And let me just cite an example. One of the challenging problems is that from once the board has adopted a community for inclusion in this program, we have 1 year to develop and submit the SERP. And during that time, we've got to build the relationships. We've got to identify members of the community. We've got to get forward with regards to self-governance and how that's going to take effect. One of the challenges that we had with this community was that form of self-governance. That took us, I want to say 6-7 months to get that resolved. I know Board Member Krakow was there for many of those meetings. Part of the challenge that we're facing is because of the time challenge, we are now faced with a much shorter time to build that consensus, to identify all of those. And I think what we have to do collectively is really trust one another. I can assure the community that when it comes to intention and desire to improve air quality, to protect public health, to do what's right, no one is going to be working harder than this staff. And I know from what I've seen in this community is going to work the hardest to make sure that its concerns are being addressed. So working together, and I think what Dan did today is just another reiteration that we are going to continue to work with this community to do what is necessary to make sure that they believe that we do respect them and that what we're putting together is reflected in a document that we can all agree to. What we cannot do, though, unfortunately, in the time frame that we have, because the SERP must be adopted by the board in December, is include everything. But what staff has committed to do is to include as much as they possibly can. And we believe that as much as we possibly can is going to meet those statutory requirements. And we're willing to meet with, over the next coming months, as you heard Dan talk about, and to come back in mid-2021 with a collection, with a realization of, if you will, of some of those outstanding elements that weren't able to be incorporated into this version of the SERP. And as you all know, we do have requirements when it comes to notification and what we can post and what we can present to you. And I can say to you that in the version of the SERP that staff is working on, there's been tremendous changes since the last week when we had to post it. And there will continue to be changes in that document as we continue to listen to the community, as we continue to respect the community. It's a difficult road. We all agree that this is not going to be easy, but we will continue to do our best. We'll continue to work hard. We'll continue to work with the community that we can. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I will just conclude my comments, and please accept my assurances that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that everything that we're doing is successful.
Thank you, Wayne, for those comments, and I hope that they're heard and the community can accept some of those challenges and accept what we're all going through. I can say that this is a community that I have lived very close to for most of my life and have been in and out of a lot of my life, especially when my late father was the supervisor, even before he was the supervisor. I've toured personally many of the communities that not only have horrible air quality issues, but also horrible water quality issues and other land use issues that stack the deck in a very unfortunate and very wrong way. And I am committed to this body making sure we do everything we can from an air quality perspective to continue to push that forward and make things right. And so I encourage staff to continue working with the organization and with the group and hopefully incorporate what we can. But I do understand our statutory limits are what they are. And so, and I'm hopeful that we will see a continuance of this into next year and for a future update, including those items that the community has come forward asking for now. I see Councilmember Mitchell, you raise your hand, go right ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And first of all, thank you to all of the people who participate in the steering committee and to our staff who has worked with you through this process. I think it is unfortunate that the pandemic has entered its ugly claws into the process and interrupted the smooth running of the steps that we have to go through to get to a SERP. And I do think it's unfortunate that there is this element of distrust between the community and our staff. Of course, I haven't attended these meetings, and so it is disappointing to see that the community feels that it hasn't been heard, and that they aren't having enough say over this as they may want. This community, this is unique. It's not quite like any of the other communities we have in the South Coast, but it is like some of the other communities that we have in the state. And I will mention to those who may not know, I am the representative to the California Air Resources Board for the South Coast District for at least maybe another few weeks. And so I have reviewed the SERPs, the communities that are in San Joaquin Valley, Valley District, and also for the one that's down in El Centro. And this particular community resembles those more than industrial areas that we have in Los Angeles that are our year one communities. So there are unique issues here in this community. And one of the biggest ones that we are aware of is the prevalent PM10 and 2.5. So those are pretty difficult to attack also. I mean, that's the issue up in San Joaquin. And where you have dust, you've got, how do you control that? That's not easy to do. You have the Salton Sea and the playa from the Salton Sea. And that's an issue similar to the one that is happening down in El Centro, although El Centro being right on the border with Mexico has all kinds of truck traffic coming across that border. So they have more of a mix going there. But in San Joaquin, one of the issues was sites. And we went through that at length because, as you know, I think it's been recognized in your process, the air districts do not have control over pesticides. Now, what was involved up in San Joaquin was that the Air District would work and CARB would work with the Department of Agriculture and the department that controls pesticides, DPR, I believe is what it is, to at least get notification of when pesticides were going to be released, and that there would then be identification of that on websites that would interconnect, and the community would have some knowledge of what was happening and be able to prepare for it. So the other thing you have in your list is land use. And that's an area that we have been struggling with. You heard me say it this morning, because we don't control land use. But it's important that we collaborate and work with those people who do control land use. So I do want you to be aware when in preparing that SERP and what can be done in the SERP is that it is realistic and it is emissions over which we have control. Or in the case of pesticides, we don't control it, but we can work with other agencies that do control it. And so the SERPs that many of the SERPs mention that we don't control it, but we'll work with an agency that does control it. So, I mean, that would normally be part of the SERP. So there's a lot of work to be done here. I know this community has suffered for a long time. We have heard from you at the CARB level many times. And there are serious problems here that need to be addressed. And I think that there's more to be done on this SERP to address the community's concerns and to make sure we're all educated on what parts of the complaints and priorities over which the Air District does have control, or CARB does have some control, where that can actually be accomplished. What happens today, and this is a question to staff, what happens if this committee does not approve this SERP?
Well, you really don't approve the SERP, and even when it goes before the entire board, the board doesn't approve the SERP. That's CARB's
final say.
Authority. That's correct. So the board adopts the SERP.
So, because what we've heard this morning from the committee, steering committee and the community, is that they don't want us to recommend adoption. I mean, I guess that would be what they're asking us. And since there is another meeting planned between now and the board meeting, I would suggest that we simply forward this on to the next committee meeting and then to the board for its review in December. So I think there's a lot of work to be done here. I think there's some distrust issues that need to be resolved. We won't accomplish anything if we don't get to a point where we trust each other and where we actually can work together. And that's first priority here, I think.
So Mayor Mitchell?
Yes.
I apologize to interrupt. One of the points that I had failed to mention earlier, and when I had talked about the difference of views and different perspectives, you all well know that you have different parties, right? And you may hear loudly from one group, and that group may or may not represent the entire group. The issue of advancing this SERP was put to a vote last night. And that vote was to move forward. So the concept of perhaps not approving or delaying anything, you know, we've also made the commitment that we're going to continue to work on the elements that have been identified. I know it's relatively early, but this morning, in fact, I'd sent a letter to all of the board members that contained a letter with regards to the comments that we had received and our response to those comments. And as you heard Dan say, we're committed to continuing to work on these, continuing to meet with the CSC, and then hopefully at the actual December board meeting, have a much greater consensus. Now, while there was a positive vote, while the majority of people voted to move forward, I'll admit there wasn't a quorum. But that still shouldn't diminish the fact that the majority of people that were there did vote to move forward. So I would just urge the committee to consider all of those facts, and that at the board meeting, there you have the opportunity to really make the question. If the board decides not to move for adoption and for submittal to CARB, then we would not have met our statutory obligation, which is to complete this within 1 year from the date of designation. And that's been my driving force, is we have to meet our statutory obligations.
Thank you. Understood? And so there's a lot of work to be done. I'll just say that this isn't done, but we recognize the SERP as living documents that we go back and review them and change them and add things to them. Or progress reports are part of that. What have we accomplished with respect to the implementation, et cetera. So I will end my comments at this point.
Very good. Any other board member comments?
Vice Chair?
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
So I've got I guess an observation and a question that I'd like confirmation on in terms of the next steps. Is that okay?
Please.
So, one thing that I think, we haven't mentioned yet is, we do have a board member, from this community, who knows this community so well. And I think when it comes to issues of trust, when it comes to issues of making sure that this community has strong, effective representative on this board, this is relevant. In addition to Vice Chair Benoit from Riverside County, and somebody that has a deep interest and curiosity in all parts of the county, we have Supervisor Perez representing this community on our board. And he's a very effective, experienced advocate with deep relationships with almost all of the members of this CSC. So I think this is our real ace in the hole here, is Member Perez and his ability, when push comes to shove, when votes have to be taken, when he's up on the dais, to be a strong advocate for this community. And I think that's a real blessing for our board. Just some clarity then on the next steps, and hopefully this can sort of be answered, maybe with a yes or no, because I think clarity on next steps is important. My understanding is that there's going to be a response to comments and potentially a revised draft SERP on Tuesday. Folks are going to have the opportunity, it really is difficult, but over the Thanksgiving weekend, to eyeball that, see what changes have been made, see how it corresponds to some of the outstanding comments. Then we're going to have a meeting with the CSC to go over this response to comments the week of November 30th. We're going to see sort of what remains outstanding, hopefully in a very organized way, and staff will be able to determine what they propose to continue to work on over the next few months. And then at our governing board meeting on the 4th, we will have the opportunity to do our job on this CSC, on this SERP, but also have a clear understanding, whether it be a PowerPoint or resolution or something from staff, on what other issues staff is committed to work on in the first and second quarter of next year, and with some timeline and explanation of how that is going to work so that folks feel comfortable what's actually going to happen. That's understanding of what the future looks like on this. I think it's a fair, reasonable approach that I think we're going to have a good SERP at the end of this process. But let me just clarify, is that what we're planning to do?
So I agree that it's a broad process, right? Part of the elements will be actually worked out in the coming months, as you described, Board Member Krakoff. So the timeline may not have the detail that people would like, but we need to have the major objectives there. So for instance, one of the aspects, let's just say Salton Sea, developing a monitoring network. One of the things that we heard about was low-cost monitors isn't sufficient. We need to understand what's available, what are the community concerns, how do we integrate it into some of the existing efforts that are already underway. That kind of detail will not be what you have available for you next week. But the high level objective within a time frame can certainly be there. Without a doubt, the board package that you will see next Friday will be different than what we are discussing here today. There will be more detail. But as I noted earlier, because of Brown Act considerations, we could only present the material that was noticed. And so we're constantly do that. And the challenge that we have is that Tuesday is the day by which we have to make changes that we can post. And so that's sort of what locks us in. But that will only lock us in for the presentation. As we've said, we're going to continue to evolve and to work with this. The challenge is obviously at some point we've got to have a plan and we can say, this is what we're moving on. And we can come back and say, this is where we're successful. These are where changes, all of those things in the normal process. So in a broad sense, Board Member Krakow, yes, more details to follow, but all the main elements that you identified, yes.
Very good. Any other board member comments, questions?
Yes, I have one question. This is Vanessa. Did we have the same amount of time for this process as we did with the previous presentation in Southeast LA?
Yes.
Okay, so I understand that this is a unique community and it has a challenging set of issues, but I appreciate that staff is willing to continue this dialogue. And I just also wanted to thank all the community members who spent so many hours dedicated to this effort. Y a los que hablan español, ya sé que alguien dijo que no lo estamos escuchando, pero nomás quiero que sepan que le damos gracias por todo lo que está haciendo para este esfuerzo y vamos a acabar el plano con toda su ayuda. Gracias. I was just thinking in Spanish.
Very good. Great comments. All right. Unless there's any other comments from our board, we'll go ahead and go on to the next item. All right. We'll go ahead and go on to the regulatory overview of the retail mobile fueling operations. Susan Nakamura, please go ahead.
Sorry, I had to. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to provide an overview of mobile fueling and some of the regulatory challenges that we're looking at in terms of this rule development. We did initiate rule development. We're in the very early parts of the rule development process. We held one working group meeting, but we wanted to provide an overview because this is sort of an emerging area in terms of gasoline dispensing. And we wanted to highlight this rule development process to the Station Resource Committee. So traditionally, our rules have focused on stationary gasoline dispensing facilities. We do have provisions for mobile fueling. The mobile fueling primarily has been for non-retail, so not to the public, but for individual businesses that are dispensing to their own customers or to a specific fleet. The mobile fuelers are retail mobile fueling operations that we're starting to see that have been emerging over the past several years. They'll be either kind of what's referred to as an app-based type of mobile fueling that they're fueling to individual vehicles, fleets. There's some articles on the site about some mobile fueling companies that are also providing services at sports and large entertainment venues. And so what we're doing is we've initiated the rule development process to look at the retail mobile fueling and to try to establish some rules and provisions for that. But there are a number of challenges as we're moving forward. Next slide, please. So for mobile fueling and gasoline transfer, it's all regulated currently under Rule 461. And 461 does establish requirements for the stationary as well as for mobile fuelers. And there's two main requirements. And the first requirement is for phase 1 vapor recovery. And that's where you have the fuel being dispensed into the tank of the mobile fueler or into the gasoline tank for the large tank that will be distributed to the stationary gasoline station. And then the phase 2 vapor recovery, which is the capture of the vapors that are going from the mobile fueler to the motor vehicle. What I wanted to highlight here is that the equipment that's used for both the stationary and for mobile fuelers, we do rely on the California Air Resources Board CARB, and that equipment is certified. And so that is the process and the approach that we've used in 461, and it is the process that we'd like to continue moving forward, but I'll highlight what the challenge is there. Next slide, please. So the importance of the vapor recovery when we look at the phase 1 and the phase 2 is we want to capture those vapors. Gasoline has a very high vapor pressure, and there's VOC emissions, which are associated with, which is an ozone precursor, and there's benzene emissions, which is a carcinogen. So we want to make sure that as anyone is dispensing gasoline, that they do have the phase 1 vapor recovery as it's being filled into the truck that's going to be dispensing the fuel, and then that there's the phase 2 vapor recovery as it's being dispensed into the vehicle, and then the tank color, surface, and the insulation, because we want to minimize the temperature and any increase in temperature of the fuel that's in the tank of the truck for the mobile fueler. There are evaporative emissions even when you're not dispensing or transferring the fuel. There are these standing losses and breathing losses of the evaporative emissions. So it's critical that you have these vapor recovery systems. Next slide, please. So as I highlighted that we do rely on the CARB certifications, and as we look at the CARB certifications for mobile fuelers, there's two certifications. One is for an entire system that includes the phase 1 and phase 2 vapor recovery systems for mobile fueler, and embedded in the phase 2, it also has requirements for the insulation and also the tank color, which I'll highlight in the next slide. But there's a problem with this first certification. It's referred to as the HILVAC vapor recovery system. There's one component within the vapor recovery system that's currently not being manufactured. So the retail mobile fuelers that could possibly use this, it's currently not available because of this one part that is missing. The manufacturer of the system is working on getting a replacement component, but they still would then need to recertify, which could take more than a year. There is another certified component for mobile fuelers that includes a nozzle and a hose. This is for non-phase 2 dispensing. This type of dispensing configuration is allowed under Rule 461, but really more for those that are doing fleet vehicle, where the fleet is known in terms of that it has onboard vapor recovery systems on those vehicles. Next slide, please. So just wanted to highlight these, kind of using this color theme of the orange, green, and purple. So as we look in the CARB, the certified phase 1 vapor recovery, that that's the fueling of the mobile fueler and the gasoline going from wherever they're getting it. Could be from a fueling rack, it could be from another gasoline station, but that there is a vapor return line that's associated with that. So this current certified system, which is the HILVAC system, which I'm highlighting, does have the phase 1 vapor recovery. Click, please. It also has a feature of the phase 2 vapor recovery, the phase 2 nozzle and pressure gauges, and then click, please. And then embedded also within the phase 2 vapor recovery is requirements that this particular certified system does require reflective tank exterior and also a 2-inch insulation to minimize temperature of the fuel. So next slide, please. So this is a comparison of the HILVAC system, and as highlighted in the previous slide, that the HILVAC system has all of those vapor recovery systems and the mechanisms to reduce the temperature or minimize the temperature of the fuel within the mobile fueling system. And so when we compare it to, there's two other business models of retail mobile fueling that we're aware of. One is a large tank that has a capacity of about 1,200 gallons. The other type of business model that we see is pickup trucks that have multiple smaller tanks. Generally, these tanks are less than 120 gallons. It can have, anywhere, if it has more than two, then it would need to be permitted under our rules. But we have seen these multiple tanks on the back of these pickup trucks. But this is just a comparison to show the vapor recovery systems that are on these other types of business models that we're seeing. Next slide. So the challenge that we have as we move into rulemaking is that it is our preference that we continue to be able to rely on the CARB certified equipment. But in the absence of the HILVAC system, there currently isn't a system that has phase 1, phase 2 vapor recovery and all sort of the bells and whistles in that type of certification that's available today. And it's difficult as we move forward because we have these retail mobile fueling operations that are occurring now. And so what we're doing is we're looking at what types of interim provisions that we can incorporate in the absence of having the certified equipment from CARB. And then when that certified equipment, then we have to decide how those particular operations would incorporate the certified equipment as they move forward and taking into consideration stranded assets. The concern for us is that when somebody is what we refer to as top loading or splash loading, where they don't have a phase 2 vapor recovery and they're that the emissions from that, it's very emissive. It can be 50 times higher than the dispensing with a phase 2 vapor recovery into an automobile and with all the vapor recovery controls. So in regards to the need for rulemaking, there's a number of areas that we feel that are needed. We want to go back to our Rule 219, which establishes the permitting requirements, and currently those units that are less than 250 gallons, they're currently exempt from permitting. The thought there at the time wasn't that we would have these folks that would be using these smaller types of units that would be used for retail and constantly be refueling them. And so we want to make sure that we can bring them into our permit system and then ensure that they're going through the permit process just as a stationary gasoline dispensing facility and any other facility to ensure we can put all the appropriate safeguards because we are they could be posing a fairly significant health risk. We also want to make sure that we can establish the provisions for retail mobile fueling and be clear about what those provisions are. I think there's ambiguity in our rules when we talk about mobile fueling and we don't make a strong distinction between retail versus non-retail. And then also, I think that when we talk about the clear and consistent requirements and leveling the playing field, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my computer. I'm on the next slide. On the for the requirements and leveling the playing field, there's two aspects here. The first aspect is in regards to leveling the playing field between the larger business model of the 1,200 gallons to the pickup truck. I do want to acknowledge that the 1,200 gallon model that business has approached us and is trying to work with us in regards to permitting. the other business model, we realize it is more emissive, but we need to make sure that we're leveling the playing field so everybody has the same requirements. The other part of leveling the playing field also is the comparison between mobile fuelers and the requirements for stationary gasoline dispensing facilities. So we want to make sure that as we're moving forward that we're not having lesser requirements for mobile fuelers compared to the stationary gasoline dispensing facilities. Next slide. So this is just highlighting some of the regulatory challenges that moving forward, where there are challenges in regards to how we develop an enforceable rule. This is a little bit more challenging because we don't have a fixed location where we can go and visit the and witness the operations. They're constantly moving from location to location at different times of the day. They have varying customer bases, so it will require much more record keeping so we can ensure that they're complying with whatever provisions that we establish. There are some gaps in data that we still need to fill. We're not exactly sure who the retail mobile fuelers are. We know some of them. They're very difficult to contact, and we've been trying to reach out doing internet searches, and some have responded to our survey and some haven't. There's also, we need to make sure in terms of the public health protection that because we're dealing with benzene, which is a carcinogen, we want to make sure that they're following all of our permitting requirements. The health risk thresholds aren't being exceeded. We're looking at ways that we can work to have reasonable limits for them, but then still stay within the guardrails of our existing rules and regulations. And then agency coordination. We have been having discussions with weights and measures. We've been talking to the fire authorities, a lot of different thoughts, but I think the main message is making sure that we coordinate with the local fire authorities. They want to know who our list is, and we want to know their list. We want to make sure that we're not moving forward and causing an issue that they would be concerned with. Safety first. So last slide, next, is we're continuing with our working group meetings in the rulemaking process. We hope to have another working group meeting in December. We'll continue reaching out to the other agencies, and this is on the rule forecast for September 2021. Any questions?
Susan, one quick question. The permit that was for the larger units, how many permits have been issued, or how many trucks are now on the road doing this larger fuel dispensing? And as far as the smaller trucks, my understanding is there's no permit for that at all, correct?
That's correct. So for the larger 1,200, there's 5 permits for one facility, one business.
Very good. Board members, comments, questions?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to thank staff for continuing to work on this. This seems like such a good idea to help reduce traffic and overall emissions. If we can figure out common sense ways to do these permittings, I think it's has the potential to be a good business model that can help a lot of people. So I appreciate the continued effort on it.
Rest of my board members, any other questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, I just want to inquire a little bit on this because one of these mobile operators did contact me in the last 6-7 months, I guess. And you did say that there may be a number of them out there operating, but we don't know who they are. Is that right?
So for the retail, on the non-retail side, we have a pretty good idea. But even then, I think it's like, it was funny because when I was driving in, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, that's a mobile fueler. And you can tell by the placard that of what type of material that they're carrying. So I knew that it was gasoline. So that was, one is like, I said, have they contacted us? And so they're not permitted, the one that I had seen today. So it is difficult. It is challenging. We know some based on our internet searches and newspaper articles. but we're really not sure if there's other ones that are out there that need to be permitted under our existing rules. And then as we move forward, and making sure that they will be compliant with any future requirements.
Then on this component that is not being manufactured now, do we have any idea that first of all, whether they will manufacture it, and second, if they will, when it would be available?
So the Hillvac company, they are working to manufacture it and patent it themselves. And so I think it's probably a year, 2 years out in terms of getting the final piece made, and then the CARB certification.
And then on slide, let's see, what is 6, where you talk about the phase 1 and 2 vapor recovery systems. Does our rule require all of those 3 components to be compliant?
So our rule, yes, the only thing that I just want to highlight is that the tank surface reflectivity and insulation, the third purple box, it's actually embedded in the green box. So, but I just wanted to separate those 3 items out to highlight them. But yes, our rule does require the phase 1 vapor recovery and the phase 2 vapor recovery.
So do we have any mobile fueling system operating that is permitted and meets all 3 requirements?
Yes, there are, I believe, almost 70 that are doing non-retail that are using the Hillvac system.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a bit of timing because this piece became unavailable around 2016, 2017. And possibly if this one piece which is called the mini jet, I had actually mini jet pump, if it was being manufactured, then maybe we would be in a different situation.
Okay. So this is just informational. You're going to keep working on this rule and try to find a solution while needed parts are getting ready to be manufactured.
Yeah, and that was one of the areas that I highlighted in the challenge, is that if we had our preference, it would be, hey, let's wait until we get the CARB certified equipment before we allow this. But these operations are occurring now, so we have to establish something in the interim. And this is an issue that's not just unique to South Coast. It's been, discussed at other agencies throughout the state in terms of how we move forward. There's a lot of eyes watching us in terms of how we move forward on the mobile fueling.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, staff, for bringing this forward. I know we were all getting pinged individually, and I want to make sure that the body got a chance to hear this and hear where everything was at. And I'm encouraged that we'll continue to move forward, and interested to see where this pool goes. Do we have any public comment on this item right now? Not seeing any hands raised. Again, *9 if you're on the phone. Oh, I do see your raised hand. Bill Lamar, go ahead. Bill?
Can you hear me?
Here we go, Bill. Go ahead.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance, and I'm speaking on behalf of the California Fuels and Convenience Alliance. CEFCA is the industry's statewide trade association representing the needs of independent wholesale and retail marketers of gasoline, diesel, lubricating oils, and other petroleum products, transporters of those products, and retail convenience store operators. The vast majority of their members are small business owners, with many of them being family-owned businesses passed down from one generation to the next. It's problematic to me as to whether the amount of emissions is lesser or greater if I drive to the gas pump or if the gas pump drives to me. Either way, both vehicles are discharging fossil fuel emissions. In the case of a new business model like the ones being discussed, it seems more likely that their trucks run on diesel rather than on gasoline that they deliver to customers, thereby adding to the diesel emissions already prevalent in the communities they serve. Careless acts and mistakes happen in all businesses, but in the case of one such company, your agency has already issued them 4 notices of violation in the last few years for equipment and permit deficiencies. Businesses are always facing new threats. Some come from innovation, some come from technology, and some come from regulators like yourselves. For many restaurants, it's the food trucks that present unfair competition. For shopping malls and brick and mortar stores, it's online shopping. For movie theaters, it's subscription-based streaming services like Netflix. In this case, the bottom line for us is that we believe that businesses wanting to compete with us on a delivery and sale of the same product should be held to the same, not less stringent regulatory standards that we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for your comments. Anyone else wish to make public comment on this item? Not seeing anyone. All right. Staff, we do have one more item left before our written reports and other public comment. We have about 10 minutes to go. Do we feel we can squeeze all that in, or should we go ahead and take item number 7 at a future date?
I think it can go fairly quickly.
Okay, let's go ahead and we'll do the presentation on item number 7. Sure. Michael, make it quick.
All right, you betcha. So I just wanted to give you guys an update. By the way, thank you, by the way, for calling this meeting early, because this way I can squeeze this in. I wanted to give you guys an update on the flare event notification system. Next slide, please. So by way of background, remember we have a rule 1118 that regulates refinery flaring. And in that rule, we require them to submit a notification when they have a flaring event. We updated last year the FENS notification system to include a public portal that was a map, if you recall, of all the different locations of the flaring events. And we provided to the public both current, upcoming, and past events. We launched that last year again in 2019, and we've also recently now done upgrades that we just launched last month. So that's why I wanted to come back to you guys to kind of give you a little update on that. This is an informational item, by the way. Okay, next slide, please. So what do? So in response to some of the comments we received from the public, they said, look, this is all great, but why couldn't you provide to us what the wind speed and direction is at the location of that flare? That way they would know if their community could be potentially impacted during a flaring event. So we provided that. You'll see that in that circle there. It's both in miles per hour, as well as the direction where it's in. And we even threw in an arrow to kind of make it really intuitive so folks will know kind of the direction where that wind speed is at. And we're using the same meteorological data that we use for our other stations that are located, or where our station is located. Okay, they also sent, we added a link that folks could use to go directly to the facility webpage. So each of the refineries or where the flares are located have a specific web page that provides quarterly emissions data and various other pieces of information. So we added that link for convenience so folks can go right there. Slide number 4, please. Okay, we also, again, in response to a public interest, on the front page, we just have some quickie little, what's the current flaring, what's some recent upcoming one that's going to be occurring. And folks had asked for just some of the real recent past events just on that front page. We still provide all of it once you go deeper into the actual facility page, but this will be more for the upfront. The other thing we added was sometimes we've noticed over the past year that facilities will have planned for an event and then the event doesn't occur. And at that time, we didn't really have anything to notify or make that be obvious to the public that it did not occur. Now we add that feature in there to allow the refineries to identify it. We do not delete any events. That's because the notifications have been sent out. So we do want to make sure that folks can basically follow the historical trail. Next slide, please. And then the last new feature that we added was to provide our own staff to add a particular comment with regards to a flaring event. So right now, all the information that's provided is provided by the refineries. Makes sense, right? So when they're going to do the flaring, the reason for the flaring, things like that. But sometimes our enforcement team knows a little bit more information and could provide that to the public, and this enables them to do that. Next slide, please. And this is just a visual then to remind everybody what that public portal looks like and highlighted those various areas that I just noted. Last slide, please. And so we continue our work. We're going to be working now. A next step for FENS is going to be our phase 3. We're taking in input as I speak, and some of those things I noted here, such as we were asked to look further into streamlining when you have an unplanned event that lasts a couple of days, get people's better understanding of that, as well as try to utilize the program as all this great information is being noted, and that possibly the refineries could use this when they submit their SCAR reports or the quarterly reports. So we're just trying to make it more useful for them in the future. And that's all I have to report. So thank you.
Very good. And Michael, how far away are we? I mean, I love the directional arrow and that information, the wind speed, but how far away from an automated plume model or other GIS ability to throw that on the map and so people can actually see the affected area and the distance and all the other. And I know those plume models usually take a little more detail, but just curious, is that on the path, or could that be on the path here?
Sure, it sure could. I mean, as you noted, that technology is already available. I would just have to kind of figure out how the programming would, just to make sure it doesn't get overloaded, or that that maybe it'll be an option by which someone would click if they wanted to see it, as opposed to having something that's automatic, right? Because then it would slow people's systems down either to get to that, possibly that direct information. But it's a good suggestion.
Any other board member comments or questions on this item?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kraus. Always at it again, trying to make our refinery activities interesting and exciting.
No problem.
Let me ask you a question. This is not, as a new board member, this is not something that I lived through the adoption of this rule.
Sure.
Have we learned through this process about the frequency of these flaring events, whether they're occurring more or less than we thought, or do we already know that and this is just simply a way of giving the public the information? Is that clear?
Yes. So since the inception of the rule, when we did require those notifications, we are aware of those events. It's interesting you bring this up because just recently we were looking at some of the statistical data to kind of see what we can find why there's more flaring events. And actually it kind of coincides with things like if they have turnaround periods, and the refiners will have different times or different years by which they're doing the turnarounds, we then kind of see an increase or an uptick in that flaring. We're also learning more about how some of the support facilities, so for example, the hydrogen plants and how they interplay in that connection. We are going to be working actually on amending the Rule 11A. With scoping plans. We've got a lot of information right now that we're reviewing currently to kind of see ways in which we, particularly on the planned events, to kind of say to ourselves, if you know you've got a planned event, then how about planning to utilize that gas instead of flaring it into something that's a little bit more beneficial and possibly for their own facilities as well.
Yeah, I mean, my recollection is that updating of that rule, might be in our AQMP and possibly in the Wilmington Carson SERP. I don't remember offhand though, but so I guess
yes, that is.
Yeah, but to the extent that you're learning more about this, and I don't want to. I know I've got another meeting to go to, but are there more flaring events than we thought, or less?
Yeah, we have not seen any. Again, it can be cyclical, but we don't necessarily see any uptick per se on that. Again, we do see upticks normally already, again, because of activities that are occurring. But I think what the latest FENS program will provide us an insight, which we didn't before, is the reasoning for the flaring. So we can now start tying it back and start looking at those patterns. But again, it's only been 1 year.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Councilmember Mitchell, my apologies, your hand was raised. Go right ahead.
I know, but we've got the other meeting on. I just wondered, because I get email notifications of all the flaring since I live right down here where all that occurs. But where do I find the FENS? Is it on our AQMD website, or is it a separate app that you can download, or how do I get there?
It is on a separate platform, but we'll go ahead and send you the link. How about that?
That's great. Thank you.
All right, you bet.
Very good. Any other board member comments on this one? Any public comment on this item? Not seeing any hands raised. We have our written reports are attached, item 8 and 9. Any questions or comments from our board on that? Not seeing anyone raising their hand. Any public comments? Any other business by the body?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, as always.
Okay, I do have a hand raised now. Mr. Rothbart, is this for public comment?
Thank you very much. Sorry about the technical difficulties before. This is David Rothbart with the Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts, and just wanted to thank staff for working with us on Rule 1150.3. We really appreciate that, and just really wanted to say overall, we thank staff for segregating the biogas to new rules. It really is appropriate to have biogas listed separately in a rule than natural gas, and we really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you. Any other public comment for items not on the agenda, anyone? Star 9 if you're on the phone, or raise hand at the bottom button on your screen. I'm not seeing any, and with that, and with 3 minutes to spare, I'll go ahead and call the Stationary Source Committee adjourned. So thank you all for joining us today, and thank you staff for all your hard work. Great meeting, and also thank you for letting us get started earlier today. That was, thanks to all my board members for joining early. That obviously helped quite a bit. We would not have been able to finish obviously this meeting without them. So thank you all. Everyone have a great weekend.
Thanksgiving, everyone.
You too.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.